Ambassador Zefkar sat in his private chamber aboard the massive ship called Serenity's Edge and stared at the files spread across his desk. The blue light from his computer screen made his scaled face look even more worried than usual. For 3 months now he had been reading the same reports over and over again, but they still made no sense to him. The humans were coming, and nobody in the Galactic Council knew what to expect from them. The first meeting between humans and the galaxy had happened by accident, near a star system the humans called Kepler 442, a Zixian trading ship had sent out. A distress call when Krellin pirates attacked them. The Zixians expected no help because that area of space was empty and dangerous. Most ships stayed away from pirate territory unless they had no choice, but then a human ship called New Horizon had appeared. Captain Jake Morrison and his crew received the distress signal and came to help even though they had never seen a Zixian before in their lives. When they arrived, they found 3 Krellin warships attacking one small trading vessel. Any smart captain would have turned around and left. The Krellins were known across the galaxy as fierce fighters with powerful weapons. Jake Morrison did not turn around. He ordered his ship to attack the pirates even though his single vessel faced 3 enemy ships. The Krellins had better weapons and stronger shields, but somehow the humans won the fight. They used strange tactics that made no sense to anyone watching. They flew their ship in patterns that should have gotten them killed, but instead confused the pirates so much that the Krellins retreated. After the battle, the Zixian captain named Veltar tried to thank the humans and offer them payment for their help. This was normal behavior in the galaxy. When someone saved your life, you paid them or gave them something valuable in return. But the humans refused any payment. Captain Morrison said they were just glad everyone was safe. The Zixians asked why the humans had risked their lives for complete strangers. The human doctor named Lisa Parker answered in a way that shocked everyone. She said they helped because it was the right thing to do. She explained that humans could not just watch innocent people get hurt when they had the power to stop it. This answer troubled Veltar more than the battle itself. In all his years of trading across the galaxy, he had never met anyone who would fight for strangers without wanting something in return. Most species helped their own kind or their allies, but nobody helped random people just because it was right. The idea seemed crazy and dangerous. Veltar reported everything to the Galactic Council, and they immediately called for emergency meetings. A species that fought for strangers without payment was something new and scary. If humans did this kind of thing regularly, they could change how the whole galaxy worked. Wars might start if humans decided to help one side against another. Trade agreements could fall apart if humans gave things away for free. Now Ambassador Zefkar had to prepare for formal first contact with these strange creatures. The human delegation was already traveling toward the neutral meeting point on a ship they called Earth's Voice. Their ambassador was a woman named Helen Roberts, who had served as a diplomat on their home planet for many years. The file said she was smart and experienced, but they also said she had the same crazy human ideas about helping others. Zefkar looked at the photos of the human delegation. They looked almost exactly like his own people, except for having different colored skin and no scales. Their faces showed emotions clearly, which made some species uncomfortable. Most advanced civilizations had learned to hide their feelings during important meetings, but humans seemed to show exactly what they were thinking. The security reports worried him most. Chief Keth of the Zarian Collective had sent warnings about human unpredictability. The Zarians were the galaxy's best soldiers, and they were afraid of a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. This made no sense until Zefkar read about human military history on their own planet. Humans had fought each other for thousands of years using tactics that other species found disturbing. They would sacrifice their own lives to save their friends. They would fight impossible battles when they believed their cause was right. They would never surrender even when defeat was certain. Worst of all, they would help their enemies after winning a war instead of destroying them completely. Tomorrow the humans would arrive and everything would change. Zefkar closed the files and tried to sleep, but his mind kept thinking about Dr. Parker's words. She had said helping others was the right thing to do, as if this was obvious to everyone. But it was not obvious to anyone else in the galaxy. Maybe that was why the humans were so dangerous. They did not think like anyone else, and they could not be predicted or controlled. The galaxy was about to meet a species that cared more about doing right than staying safe. Zefkar wondered if this would destroy everything they had built or make it better somehow. Either way, there was no stopping what was coming. The humans were already on their way. Dr. Richard Hayes stepped off the human transport ship and looked around the docking bay of Haven Station with wide eyes full of wonder. The massive space station served as neutral ground for diplomatic meetings between different species, but to Richard it looked like the most amazing place in the universe. Creatures he had only dreamed about walked past him going about their daily business. Some had 4 arms while others floated in the air using technology he could not understand. Ambassador Helen Roberts tried to keep the human delegation moving toward their assigned quarters, but Richard kept stopping to stare at everything around him. A group of tall blue beings with crystal growths on their heads caught his attention, and he immediately walked over to introduce himself. The Altarians looked surprised when this strange human started asking them questions about their biology and culture. Kevin Thompson, the human engineer, was just as bad. He found a group of mechanical beings called Zirians and started a conversation about quantum mechanics that lasted for 3 hours. The Zirians had never met an organic creature who understood their technology well enough to discuss it properly. Kevin was not trying to steal their secrets or gain an advantage. He simply found their ideas fascinating and wanted to learn more about how they thought. Security Chief Keth watched all of this from his command center and felt growing alarm. In his 300 years of service, he had seen thousands of first contact situations. New species always followed the same pattern when they met other civilizations. They would ask about trade opportunities, territorial boundaries, military strength, and political alliances. They wanted to know what they could gain and what threats they might face. The humans were different. They asked questions that made no sense from a strategic point of view. Dr. Hayes wanted to know about alien art and music and philosophy. Engineer Thompson cared more about understanding alien science than copying it for his own use. Linguist Maria Santos spent her time creating detailed records of every alien language. She heard not for intelligence purposes, but because she thought each one was beautiful and unique. Ambassador Roberts received a formal complaint from Keth about human intelligence gathering activities. When she read his report, she started laughing so hard that tears came to her eyes. She explained that humans were naturally curious about everything around them, and that this was normal behavior for their species. Keth did not find this explanation comforting. A species that wanted to know everything about everyone else could be very dangerous even if they claimed to have peaceful intentions. The situation became more worrying when cultural attach. Danny Clark started making friends with beings from 12 different species. He would sit in the station's common areas and talk to anyone who would listen to him. He learned about their families and their hopes and their fears. He shared stories about human culture and asked questions about theirs. Soon aliens who had barely spoken to each other before were gathering around Danny to continue conversations that had started days earlier. Danny did not realize that he was doing something unprecedented. Cross-species friendships were rare in the galaxy and usually based on political or economic benefits. Most aliens were polite to each other, but kept their distance because their cultures were too different for real understanding. Danny treated everyone like potential friends and somehow made it work. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings to discuss what they called the human problem. Council members reported that their own people were becoming interested in human ideas and customs. Some aliens had started asking why their governments did not help other species the way humans did. Others wondered why they could not be friends with beings who were different from them. Trade? Coordinator Velanash complained that humans were disrupting established business relationships. Instead of following normal procedures they would share their technology freely with anyone who asked about it. They gave away valuable information without asking for anything in return. This made other species look greedy and selfish by comparison. Dr. Hayes made things worse by setting up what he called cultural exchange sessions. He would gather groups of different aliens and encourage them to share their beliefs and traditions with each other. These meetings were supposed to last 1 hour, but often continued for entire days as beings who had never really talked before discovered they had more in common than they thought. Military Commander Faxmore of the warrior species called Draconari attended one of these sessions out of curiosity. He found himself discussing honor and courage with a peaceful plant-based creature called a Veltari. By the end of their conversation, both beings had learned something new about bravery and sacrifice. Faxmore left the meeting feeling confused and disturbed. His people prided themselves on being strong warriors, but the gentle Veltari had showed him a different kind of strength. Ambassador Roberts met with concerned council members who wanted to know what humans really wanted from the galaxy. She tried to explain that humans did not want anything except the chance to explore and learn and make friends. This answer scared the aliens more than any threat of conquest would have. A species that sought knowledge and friendship without expecting anything in return was something they had never encountered before. Council Chairman Velkorath asked Roberts directly if humans planned to change galactic civilization. She answered honestly that humans probably would change things, but not on purpose. She explained that her people could not help being curious and friendly and helpful. These traits were part of human nature and could not be turned off just to make other species comfortable. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. The council members returned to their ships and sent urgent messages to their home governments. They reported that humans were not planning to invade or conquer anyone, but that they might be even more dangerous than warlike species. Humans could change entire civilizations just by being themselves. Meanwhile, Dr. Hayes continued his cultural exchanges completely unaware of the panic he was causing. He had learned 17 alien languages and made friends with beings from 30 different worlds. To him, this was just the beginning of an amazing adventure. He had no idea that his simple curiosity and friendliness were threatening to transform the galaxy forever. The human delegation received an invitation to visit Faxmore Prime, which was considered one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. The atmosphere contained gases that were toxic to most species, and the gravity was twice what most beings could handle. Even the native Faxmorians had to use special equipment when they spent long periods outside their protected cities. The planet served as a training ground for the galaxy's toughest warriors. Dr. Jennifer Woods checked her medical equipment one final time before the shuttle landed. She expected to treat altitude sickness, breathing problems, and muscle strain as the human team struggled with the harsh environment. The Faxmorians had warned them that most alien visitors could only stay for a few days before the planet started causing permanent damage to their bodies. Ambassador Roberts led a small team that included Commander Lisa Brooks, Engineer Kevin Thompson, and several military specialists. They wore environmental suits designed to filter the toxic atmosphere and reduce the crushing gravity. The Faxmorian greeting committee looked like giants in their heavy armor and breathing masks. General Karthok welcomed the humans to his world with polite skepticism. His people were 7 feet tall with thick bone ridges and natural armor plating. They had evolved on this brutal planet and took pride in their ability to survive where other species could not. He expected the small, soft humans to struggle with every step they took on his world. The first surprise came during the welcoming ceremony. Private Tony Miller removed his breathing mask for a few seconds to taste the alien air. Dr. Woods immediately scolded him, but noted that he showed no immediate symptoms of poisoning. The Faxmorians watched in amazement as the human soldier smiled and said the air tasted like metal and electricity. Within a week, the humans were spending longer periods outside without their protective gear. Dr. Woods documented changes in their blood chemistry that should have taken months or years to develop. Their lung capacity increased and their cells began processing the toxic gases more efficiently. Kevin Thompson started working alongside Faxmorian engineers without wearing gloves, even though the metal they used would burn most alien skin. Commander Brooks impressed everyone during the military training exercises. The Faxmorians had designed their combat courses to challenge beings who were naturally stronger and tougher than any other species in the galaxy. Brooks was smaller and weaker than any Faxmorian warrior, but she found ways around every obstacle they put in front of her. When brute strength was not enough, she used leverage and momentum. When the course required speed, she found shortcuts that no one had discovered before. When teamwork was needed, she organized her human squad to work together in ways that multiplied their individual abilities. The Faxmorians began studying human tactics to understand how such weak creatures could be so effective. The most disturbing incident happened during a mock battle in the volcanic training grounds. A young Faxmorian warrior named Groktar fell into a pit of boiling mud during the exercise. His armor protected him from immediate death, but he was trapped and would die if no one helped him quickly. The Faxmorian rescue protocols required careful planning and specialized equipment. By the time they could mount a proper rescue mission, Groktar would be dead. Tony Miller did not wait for protocols. He grabbed a rope and jumped into the pit. Without thinking about his own safety, the boiling mud burned through Miller's environmental suit in seconds, but he managed to tie the rope around Groktar and signal for the others to pull them both out. Dr. Woods treated severe burns on 60% of Miller's body, but he was more concerned about whether the Faxmorian warrior was okay. Groktar recovered completely thanks to his natural armor and advanced medical technology. He sought out Miller as soon as he could walk and asked why a human had risked his life for someone he barely knew. Miller looked confused by the question and said he could not have just watched someone die when he had the power to help. This answer shook Groktar to his core. Faxmorian culture valued strength above all else and taught that weakness should be allowed to die so that only the strong survived. The idea that someone would sacrifice himself to save another person went against everything he had been taught to believe. General Karthok called his own emergency meetings to discuss what he was seeing. The humans were adapting to his planet faster than should have been possible. They were solving problems that had been designed to test the limits of Faxmorian abilities. Worst of all, they were showing compassion and selflessness that was starting to influence his own warriors. Several young Faxmorians had started questioning their traditional values after watching human behavior. They asked why their society celebrated individual strength instead of helping each other become stronger together. Some even suggested that maybe weakness was not something to be eliminated, but something to be protected and nurtured. Dr. Woods continued documenting the physiological changes in her team. Their bone density increased to handle the heavy gravity. Their skin developed resistance to the toxic atmosphere. Their metabolism adjusted to process the alien minerals in the food and water. She was watching evolution happen in real time at a speed that defied everything science knew about adaptation. Kevin Thompson made friends with Faxmorian engineers and started sharing human technology freely. He showed them new ways to build structures that could withstand the planet's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The Faxmorians were amazed that these techniques had never occurred to them despite thousands of years of living in this environment. Commander Brooks established a training exchange program where human and Faxmorian soldiers learned from each other. The humans taught flexibility and creative thinking while the Faxmorians shared their knowledge of physical conditioning and combat techniques. Both sides became stronger through cooperation. General Karthok sent a secret report to the Galactic Council expressing his concerns about human influence on his people. He described humans as a species that could adapt to any environment and change the cultures they encountered without even trying. He warned that their ideas about helping others and working together were spreading among his warriors like an infection. The report concluded with a recommendation that humans be classified as a cultural hazard and as a res, restricted from visiting worlds with stable societies. Karthok feared that prolonged contact with humans could transform the careful traditions that had kept his people strong for millennia, but it was already too late. The changes had begun and there was no way to stop them from spreading throughout the galaxy. The emergency broadcast reached every communication system in known space at the same time. The human colony ship Freedom's Call had vanished while traveling to establish humanity's first settlement beyond their home solar system. 10,000 civilians, including families with young children, had been aboard the massive vessel when it disappeared near the edge of Drakhari territory. Ambassador Roberts received the news while attending a cultural symposium on Haven Station. Her face went pale as she read the initial reports. The Freedom's Call had been designed as a peaceful exploration vessel with minimal weapons and defenses. If pirates had taken the ship, then the colonists were probably still alive. But their situation was desperate. Within hours, the worst fears were confirmed. The Drakhari Empire sent a message to the Galactic Council demanding an enormous ransom for the human prisoners. The slavers claimed they had captured the colony ship easily because it carried no significant military escort. They threatened to sell all 10,000 humans into slavery across their empire if payment was not received within 1 month. Trade Coordinator Velanash immediately began negotiating through established diplomatic channels. The Galactic Council had dealt with Drakhari demands before and knew the process could take many months of careful bargaining. Most species preferred to pay the ransom rather than risk a military confrontation with the powerful slaver empire. Ambassador Roberts attended the emergency council meeting and listened to their plans with growing frustration. The council members spoke about trade agreements and political considerations while 10,000 of her people waited in Drakhari prison ships. When Velanash explained that negotiations typically took 6 to 8 months, she stood up and walked out of the chamber without saying a word. The human response shocked the entire galaxy. Every human ship in space began moving toward Drakhari territory within 72 hours of the announcement. Merchant vessels, research ships, and a few military craft that humanity possessed all abandoned their missions and converged on the empire that had taken their people. Captain Jake Morrison now commanded a small fleet of converted civilian ships that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons could be found. His flagship was a former cargo hauler called Earth's Vengeance that barely qualified as a warship. The entire human force consisted of maybe 50 vessels against an empire that controlled hundreds of star systems. The Galactic Council sent urgent messages ordering the humans to stand down and return to their territory. Ambassador Roberts replied with a simple statement that was broadcast across all communication networks. She said that humanity would not abandon their people and that peaceful negotiations had already failed by taking too long. Council Chairman Velkorath contacted Roberts directly and tried to explain that military action against the Drakhari was suicide. The slaver empire had crushed dozens of species that had tried to oppose them over the centuries. Their fleets were massive and their technology was advanced. A tiny human force would be destroyed without accomplishing anything except getting more people killed. Roberts listened politely to his arguments, then asked a question that silenced the entire council chamber. She wanted to know how many innocent people the galaxy was willing to sacrifice to maintain political stability. When no one answered, she said that humans had already decided they would sacrifice everything to save their own people. Dr. Patricia Green joined the human fleet as a war correspondent and documented their preparations for battle. She interviewed crew members from dozens of ships and found the same determination on every vessel. These people had never met the colonists they were trying to save, but they could not accept the idea of leaving fellow humans in slavery. Engineer Kevin Thompson worked around the clock to modify civilian ships for combat. He installed weapons, systems that had never been tested, and created defensive measures using spare parts and ingenuity. The human fleet was still hopelessly outgunned, but at least they would not go into battle completely defenseless. The strangest aspect of the human mobilization was how volunteers kept arriving from every corner of human space. People left their jobs and families to join the rescue mission, even though they knew the odds of survival were almost zero. Dr. Green interviewed a teacher named Betty Adams, who had traveled 3 weeks to join the fleet because she could not live with herself. If she did not try to help, Captain Morrison held a final briefing before the fleet entered Drakkari space. He explained that they were probably going to die, but that their sacrifice might convince the galaxy to take stronger action against the slavers. If the human fleet could inflict enough damage, then other species might find the courage to stop paying ransoms and start fighting back. The Drakkari intercepted human communications and laughed at their pathetic threats. Emperor Grathkur himself sent a mocking message to the approaching fleet, offering to sell the human prisoners at a discount if the rescuers would surrender immediately. He promised that cooperation would result in merciful deaths instead of slow torture. Morrison's response became legend throughout the galaxy. He broadcast a simple message that every species would remember for generations. He said that nobody takes human people and that the Drakkari would return the colonists or face the consequences of their actions. The concept of an entire species mobilizing to save strangers was impossible for most aliens to understand. Individual governments might fight for their own colonies or trading partners, but the idea that humans from different worlds would risk everything for people they had never met challenged basic assumptions about rational behavior. General Karthok watched the human fleet movements from Faxmore Prime and felt a mixture of admiration and terror. His people valued courage above all else, but even Faxmorian warriors would not attempt such a hopeless mission. The humans were either the bravest beings in the galaxy or completely insane. As the human ships crossed into Drakkari territory, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what would happen. Most aliens expected the rescue attempt to end in disaster, but a few began to wonder if they had underestimated these strange creatures who seemed to care more about doing right than staying alive. Admiral Sandra White stood on the bridge of the converted battleship, Earth's Defiance, and studied the tactical display showing Keth for Prime ahead of them. The Drakkari homeworld was protected by massive orbital fortresses and hundreds of warships that could destroy the small human fleet within minutes if they fought a conventional battle. But Sandra had no intention of fighting conventionally. The human rescue force had grown during their journey through Drakkari space as more ships arrived from every direction. Some were military vessels that had been racing across the galaxy to join the fight, while others were civilian craft whose crews refused to be left behind. The final count showed 87 human ships against an empire that commanded thousands. Captain Morrison contacted Admiral White from his position in the converted cargo ship Earth's Vengeance. His vessel carried most of the marine assault teams that would board the prison ships holding the colonists. Morrison reported that his people were ready for whatever came next, even though they all knew the odds were against them. The Drakhari fleet moved to intercept the humans with overwhelming confidence. Emperor Grathkar himself commanded the defense from his flagship Dark Victory, which was larger than 10 human ships combined. He expected to crush this pathetic rescue attempt quickly and then use the wreckage as a warning to other species who might consider defying his empire. Admiral White opened communications with the Drakhari Emperor and delivered humanity's final demand. She said the slavers had one chance to release the prisoners and withdraw from human space peacefully. If they refused, then the consequences would be severe and permanent. Grathkar laughed at her threats and cut the transmission. What happened next became known as the Battle of Keth for Prime, but calling it a battle was misleading. The humans did not fight the way other species expected them to fight. Instead of engaging the Drakhari fleet directly, they scattered in all directions and began attacking targets that made no military sense. Small groups of human ships struck at communication relays, supply depots, and civilian infrastructure throughout the system. They avoided the heavily armed warships and focused on destroying everything that kept Drakhari society functioning. Within hours, the Empire's command structure began falling apart as their leaders lost contact with their forces. Marine Colonel Steve Johnson led boarding parties that moved through Drakhari stations and ships like ghosts. Instead of fighting pitched battles, they used hit-and-run tactics that exploited weaknesses in enemy security. When cornered, they would fight with desperate creativity that turned every disadvantage into an opportunity. The Drakhari had built their empire on fear and intimidation. They expected their enemies to surrender when faced with superior force, or at least fight according to predictable patterns. The humans refused to follow any rules and seemed to view impossible odds as just another problem to solve through determination and ingenuity. Sergeant Amy Davis found herself trapped in a corridor aboard a Drakhari prison ship with 5 armed guards blocking her escape route. Instead of surrendering, she used emergency lighting and ventilation systems to create chaos and confusion. By the time the guards figured out what was happening, she had already freed 200 human prisoners and armed them with captured weapons. The psychological impact on the Drakhari was devastating. Their soldiers had never faced enemies who seemed genuinely unconcerned about their own survival. Humans would charge into hopeless situations if it meant protecting others or completing their mission. They turned every space battle into a series of unpredictable encounters that followed no logical pattern. Dr. Patricia Green documented the rescue operations from aboard a medical ship that moved between battle zones, treating wounded from both sides. She watched human medics risk their lives to save injured Drakhari soldiers, even while the fighting continued around them. This behavior confused the slavers more than any military tactic. Emperor Grathkar found his empire crumbling as human raids disrupted trade routes and communication networks throughout his territory. His military commanders demanded reinforcements, but the humans always struck where defenses were weakest. They seemed to know exactly which targets would cause maximum disruption with minimum risk. The turning point came when Captain Morrison's assault teams reached the prison ships holding the Freedom's Call colonists. The rescued humans provided detailed information about Drakhari operations that helped the fleet target even more critical systems. Soon entire sectors of the Empire were cut off from Central Command. Admiral White coordinated the chaos from her position near the outer edge of the system. She had studied Drakhari psychology and knew that their culture could not handle uncertainty and unpredictability. Every successful human raid made the slavers more desperate and prone to mistakes. The Drakhari Military tried to regroup and launch a coordinated counterattack, but their forces were scattered across dozens of star systems. Chasing human raiders. When they finally assembled a strike force, the targets had already moved to new locations. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose because in many ways they did not. Colonel Johnson's final assault on the main prison complex rescued over 8,000 colonists in a single operation. The remaining prisoners were held on ships that had already been captured or were fleeing toward the edge of Drakari space. Within 2 weeks of entering the system, the humans had achieved their primary objective, but they did not stop there. Admiral White broadcast a message to every Drakari world explaining that the Empire's protection of slavers would no longer be tolerated. She announced that human forces would continue targeting Drakari infrastructure until they completely abandoned their involvement in the slave trade. The threat was not empty. Human ships appeared throughout the Empire attacking any facility connected to slavery operations. They destroyed slave markets, freed prisoners, and eliminated the economic foundations that made the trade profitable. The Drakari discovered that their entire way of life was vulnerable to enemies who refused to follow conventional rules. Within a month, the Drakari Empire was negotiating for peace. They agreed to release all human prisoners, compensate the victims, and withdraw from the slave trade permanently. Other species watched in amazement as an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries collapsed because they could not adapt to an enemy that cared more about justice than survival. The galaxy would never be the same after witnessing what humans could accomplish when their most fundamental values were threatened. Fleet Admiral Rachel Turner walked into the Grand Assembly Hall on Concordia Station, knowing that the future of humanity in the galaxy would be decided in the next few hours. 6 months had passed since the destruction of the Drakari slave trade, and the ripple effects were still spreading across known space. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called to address what officials now openly referred to as the human problem. The charges against humanity were serious and varied. Representatives from dozens of species had filed complaints about human interference in galactic affairs. Some accused humans of destabilizing ancient political arrangements, while others claimed that human ideas were corrupting their populations. A few species demanded that humans be expelled from the galaxy entirely. Admiral Turner took her seat at the defendants' table alongside a diverse team of human representatives. Dr. Nathan Brooks was there as a philosopher and cultural expert. Economist Carol Mitchell had been chosen to address concerns about human trading practices. Colonel Gary Phillips represented the military perspective, while Ambassador Roberts served as the primary spokesperson for Earth's government council. Chairman Velkorath opened the proceedings by reading a list of accusations that took over an hour to complete. Humans were charged with violating established diplomatic protocols, disrupting interspecies relations, engaging in unauthorized military actions, and spreading dangerous ideological concepts throughout the galaxy. The first witness was Trade Coordinator Velenash, who complained that humans had destroyed carefully balanced economic relationships that had existed for centuries. He presented evidence showing how human willingness to share technology freely had undermined traditional trade agreements and caused economic chaos in several star systems. Dr. Brooks responded by explaining that humans believed knowledge should be shared for the benefit of everyone rather than hoarded for political or economic advantage. He argued that the galaxy would advance faster if species worked together instead of jealously guarding their discoveries. This answer only made the council members more nervous about human influence. General Karthok testified about the changes he had observed on Faxmore Prime since human contact. Young Faxmorian warriors were questioning traditional values and asking why their society celebrated individual strength instead of helping each other. Some had even suggested that protecting the weak was more honorable than eliminating them. Colonel Phillips acknowledged that human values were different from those of other species, but argued that diversity of thought was beneficial rather than dangerous. He pointed out that the galaxy had tolerated the Drakari slave trade for centuries because everyone was too afraid to challenge established power structures. Sometimes change was necessary, even if it made people uncomfortable. The most damaging testimony came from psychological analysis specialist Mordith of the Veltari Collective. She presented detailed studies showing how human behavior patterns were spreading to other species through what she called emotional contagion. Aliens who spent time with humans began adopting their values of cooperation, altruism, and cross-species friendship. Ambassador Roberts asked Dr. Mordith if she considered friendship and cooperation to be dangerous concepts. The specialist admitted that these traits were not harmful in themselves, but argued that rapid cultural change could destabilize entire civilizations. She recommended that human contact with other species be strictly limited to prevent further contamination. The council heard testimony from dozens of witnesses over 3 days. Some spoke about positive changes that humans had brought to their worlds, while others warned about the dangers of allowing such an unpredictable species to move freely through the galaxy. Every speaker agreed that humans were unlike any other known civilization. Dr. Brooks presented humanity's defense during the final day of hearings. He acknowledged that humans were different and that their presence would continue to change galactic civilization. But he argued that change was not something to be feared if it led to greater justice, cooperation, and understanding between species. He explained that humans had evolved on a world where cooperation was essential for survival. Their tendency to help others and form emotional bonds across group boundaries had allowed them to thrive in diverse environments. These same traits could help the galaxy overcome challenges that individual species could not handle alone, the philosopher concluded, by suggesting that the real question was not whether humans would change the galaxy, but whether that change would make things better or worse. He believed that a galaxy where species helped each other and worked together would be stronger and more prosperous than one based on fear and isolation. The council deliberated for 2 full days while the galaxy waited for their decision. News networks broadcast speculation about possible outcomes ranging from human expulsion to full integration into galactic society. Some species prepared for war while others sent messages of support to the human delegation. Chairman Velkorath announced the verdict to a packed assembly hall that included representatives from every major civilization. The council had reached a unanimous decision to classify humanity as a paradox species. This was a new category created specifically for beings that were too dangerous to ignore but too valuable to exclude from galactic civilization. Humans would be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council with unprecedented restrictions and privileges. They were forbidden from interfering in certain types of internal conflicts, but given broad authority to respond to humanitarian crises. Human ships could travel freely through most of space but required special permission to visit worlds with traditional cultures. The decision satisfied no one completely, but provided a framework for coexistence that both sides could accept. Humans would be watched carefully but allowed to continue their exploration and cultural exchange activities. The galaxy would adapt to their presence while trying to maintain some stability. Admiral Turner met privately with Chairman Velkorath after the formal proceedings ended. The council leader admitted his fears about humanity's long-term impact on galactic civilization. He worried that human values would eventually spread to every species and transform the careful political balance that had maintained peace for millennia. Turner acknowledged that humans would indeed change everything, but suggested that this might not be something to fear. She pointed out that the old system had allowed atrocities like the Drakhuri slave trade to continue for centuries. Maybe it was time for the galaxy to try something new. The conversation ended with both leaders understanding that they were witnessing the beginning of a new era. The galaxy would never again be predictable or stable in the old sense, but it might become something better than what had existed before. Captain Morrison received command of the joint exploration vessel New Tomorrow, which carried crew members from 12 different species. His mission was to explore the unknown regions beyond the galactic rim and search for new forms of life and civilization. The ship's log noted that they were not seeking conquest or resources, but simply trying to answer humanity's eternal question about what might be waiting out there among the stars. The universe had become a more dangerous place since humans joined the galactic community, but it had also become more hopeful and full of possibilities that no one had imagined before.